One of the key ways Disney's new DuckTales series is different than the original is it's filled with less gags. It's a series that focuses a lot more on story and character development, and won't have as many one-off episodes focused on just telling a series of jokes or making a parody in particular. So when it came time for the new DuckTales series to do a throwback to one of the original show's most parody and joke-centric episodes, there was a question of how is it going to handle it? How was the new DuckTales going to handle F.O.W.L. Duck? The answer isn't quite what I expected. It's an episode filled with adventure, with heart, and references to not just one classic Disney afternoon series, but 3. So, what happens when Launchpad becomes a secret agent? Let's find out in F.O.W.L. Duck, You Only Crash Twice. Keeping up with DuckTales Season 3 has been an incredible effort. There's so many things happening in this season. Great stories, funny episodes, incredible gags, and a lot of references to classic Disney properties and shows that I want to talk about. And to try and keep up with it, I've been writing extensive scripts, and I even built a teleprompter out of cardboard to try and make the videos as good as they could be. But the fact is, I can't keep up with it all. So for this video, and maybe the next few, we're getting away with the script. I'm just talking to you directly about what I think. And I hope it's good enough for you. Which is the perfect segue into this episode, because that's the song Dewey is singing at the beginning of F.O.W.L. Duck.
I'm just not good enough for you.
That's Dewey Duck singing out an incredible spy movie ballad, because this episode is secretly a spy movie. Sort of. This episode looks like it starts off at a high-class ball, with Launchpad and Dewey, secret agents trying to uncover some nefarious plot. Dewey's up on stage singing this incredible ballad, and Launchpad is trying to remember a passcode to meet up with his contact. Unfortunately, it doesn't go well.
Sorry, F.O.W.L. Duck. The kitchen is closed.
It turns out, though, that secret mission isn't real. They're actually playing an augmented reality game with VR/AR type glasses at Funzo's. They're playing F.O.W.L. Duck, which is the role Launchpad takes on. And it's a reference to the 1987 DuckTales episode, F.O.W.L. Duck.
It is a super high-tech game. When you put on these glasses, you're in a different world. Haven't you ever wanted to plug into a thrilling high-stakes adventure?
As fun as it is to see Dewey and Launchpad play spies in this AR game, that's definitely not enough to carry a DuckTales episode. And it's going to need a little bit more than your regular B story to bring it up to the next level. So this episode takes it way above that. This isn't just a parody of James Bond or a reference to the 1987 DuckTales episode F.O.W.L. Duck. It's a reference to 3 separate Disney afternoon classic series. F.O.W.L. Duck, the show F.O.W.L. Duck inspired, and one more classic Disney afternoon show. That's right, seemingly out of nowhere, the Rescue Rangers are in DuckTales. And we'll get to that in a minute, but I think everything else about this episode is actually a little more interesting. If you're familiar with Disney afternoon history, you might know that F.O.W.L. Duck, the 1987 DuckTales episode, was actually sort of a test for an idea that was in the works for another show, which was originally going to be called F.O.W.L. Duck and turned into Darkwing Duck. Early pitches for that show are extremely similar to Darkwing Duck, with the exception of the character's name. Eventually, they changed it to Darkwing because they were worried about stepping on the intellectual property rights of 007 and James Bond. But it all started with that parody episode of DuckTales. So it's only fitting that this revival of the idea of 007 Duck ties in not just to that original 1987 DuckTales episode, but also to elements of the show it inspired, which makes the main villain of this episode none other than Darkwing Duck villain Steelbeak.
But because there's no trap, like a steel trap.
Go!
Steelbeak isn't just a villain in this AR video game that Dewey and Launchpad are playing, however. He's actually a very real agent of F.O.W.L, and he's in a secret base under Fun Zones with Black Heron. She has the Third Eye Diamond, a mystical crystal that can enhance your intelligence. But she's using it to build a ray that she can either shoot people to make them smart, or not so smart.
I could use this weapon to make Scrooge McDuck dumber than the dummies! Any questions?
This plan might have actually worked okay if Dewey and Launchpad didn't accidentally come to their secret base to play a video game, and if Scrooge himself wasn't coming to pick them up after an afternoon of fun. F.O.W.L can't have Scrooge McDuck hanging out at their base, so they send Steelbeak up to get rid of him. And he kind of gets involved in the AR game, and everything goes wrong. As Dewey and Launchpad take a second turn at the game, Steelbeak comes in, and because it's augmented reality and they can see the altered world around them and also things in real life, they can't tell that he's not part of the video game. This results in one of my favorite parts of the episode. Steelbeak enters the AR game to convince them to leave, but it's still a video game. And Launchpad and Dewey don't know that he's real and not a character in the game. And this culminates in a really cool fight that goes back and forth between the real world and Funzos and the world that Launchpad and Dewey think they're in as they play this AR game. The shots going back and forth between the fight are just incredibly fun. If you're not familiar with the concept of augmented reality, this could be a little confusing. Augmented reality, or AR, is like virtual reality. It's got a headset that you stick on your face and it alters your perception of the world. But instead of replacing it, like in virtual reality, you can see through augmented reality goggles, and the computer overlays more things onto that reality, like the world they're seeing around them, or some of the objects they're interacting with. But they're still seeing Steelbeak because he's real. Although I think this sequence does a pretty great job of showing that, I was also wondering if this sequence might be confusing for younger viewers. Either way, the sequence ends with Launchpad and Dewey getting knocked into the ball pit, which is secretly a trap. They wind up in the underground prison under Funzos in the secret F.O.W.L base, but they still think they're playing a game, and they've just gotten to level 2. A lot of fallout happens from that, but before I get to it, I'm going to talk about my other favorite part of this episode. The spy story and the references to Darkwing Duck and to Rescue Rangers, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, are all really fun. But the funniest thing about this episode by far to me is the idea of Scrooge McDuck in an arcade. As someone who's gone on so many real adventures, the idea of video games and living out a story that isn't real just doesn't appeal to him. Until at least Webby finds a skee-ball machine themed after what made Scrooge rich in the first place, the Gold Rush. Now, Scrooge is on the way to be a arcade ticket billionaire. It's honestly a perfectly ridiculous storyline, but I love the ambition it shows of Scrooge's obsessiveness. The idea that he will always fight his hardest to go from nothing to riches. I think this is always a really fun kind of story to do with Scrooge, and it's something you see in the old comics every now and then. There's one classic Disney Duck comic series where Donald makes a fake newspaper or something and finds a way, as a joke, to trick Scrooge into thinking that money has become valueless, and the new currency of the world is fish. And the entire comic is just Scrooge McDuck getting as much fish as he can through the same clever, like sharper than the Sharpies, smarter than the Smarties attitude he's always had, amassing a wealth in fish. And I think this whole arcade sequence touches on the same kind of behavior of Scrooge McDuck, the same character traits. And seeing that obsessiveness in Scrooge was a lot of fun, especially when the payoff is this.
Mustache comb. Cost me 3 million tickets.
3 million? How much money did you spend to get those tickets?
Arcade games are fun, but arcade game tickets are worthless. I also really like seeing Webby and Scrooge bond. Whenever these two get together, for some reason, it's some of my favorite stuff in DuckTales. Okay, enough getting off topic. Let's talk about those Rescue Rangers. But to understand why the Rescue Rangers are in this episode at all, you kind of need to understand the plot a little bit better. Black Heron has this third eye diamond, and she's using it to make a ray gun that could make someone smarter or dumber. Her goal is to use it on Scrooge McDuck to make it easier to outsmart him, but first, she tested it on some rodents.
I centupled its intelligence.
Did the rat make that jumpsuit on a regular sewing machine? Or did it build it on its own tiny sewing machine? Either way, I'm very...
I think this is kind of a fun and funny way to bring in the Rescue Rangers, having an origin story for why there are these super smart rodents around. But I think it's also sort of the difference between DuckTales, the new series, and the original. As I said before, a lot of the original DuckTales series could be focused on gags or parodies. It didn't really concern itself that much with having coherent storylines. In fact, a lot of the old Disney afternoon shows worked that way. Nobody ever wondered why Chip and Dale were smart enough to wear clothes and talk to each other and rescue adults and kids and people from these situations. It was just the way the world worked. The new DuckTales series, on the other hand, has a much more complicated set of lore. Everything has a reason. There are a lot of great jokes and gags, but very rarely is story disregarded for that. So coming up with a reason, the IntelliRay, is pretty clever. As exciting as it is to have the Rescue Rangers show up in this, they're not really a major part of the episode. It's sort of a fun throwaway. It's not really a pocket episode for those characters. They're just here for a flash. And there's a good reason for that. It turns out this cameo was probably never supposed to happen. The DuckTales crew is, as always, a lot of fun online and share a lot of details about how things came to be. And it turns out that one of the things they were told they weren't allowed to do in the new DuckTales series specifically was Rescue Rangers. And the main reason for this seems to be that Rescue Rangers was being reserved for the potential of a feature film. Apparently, Disney was thinking about making an Alvin and the Chipmunk style Rescue Rangers movie. Live action actors with computer animated critters running around doing the Rescue Ranger job. There's writers for that still, and from what I can find online, it's still in production. But it's been delayed and hasn't actually happened yet. Despite not being allowed to, though, Gadget snuck her way into the storyboards of this episode. DuckTales Frank Angones describes it as a game of chicken. How far could they push sneaking Gadget, Hackwrench, and other characters into the show before the executives rightfully stopped them? And at one point, instead of just having Gadget as a cameo, all of the Rescue Rangers were just shoved into it. Because showrunner Matt Youngberg said, if we're gonna do this, if we're gonna break the rules, let's do it all the way. I really don't know the whole story, but when the DuckTales crew showed it to the execs, they caught on to how fun it was, and just kind of let it happen. And that's not the point of this episode at all. The Rescue Ranger cameo is extremely small, as terms of the story goes. They show up and do two things, and it's a lot of fun. But more than their appearance in this episode is I love that attitude exists at Disney. Here's something that's off limits. You can't do it. And the animators just push the envelope a little more and a little more with good intentions. And what they create is just so fun and joyous that it gets to happen anyway. And I love that that risk paid off. As for how much they're actually in the episode, well, like I said, it's not a lot. When Launchpad and Dewey are in jail, these mice and rodents come out of the wall and get into a plane made out of a milk jug. And Launchpad helps them fly just a little higher, and they let them out of prison. For most of the episode, that's kind of it. That's all they're in there. They're these smart rodents that were made smart in this lab, escaping themselves, and they help Dewey and Launchpad escape. And then they're gone. I actually think that's kind of the right amount. It's a fun reference for people who know who these characters are. But introducing 5 more characters in this episode would have just made it a little bit too much. After all, we already need to spend time in this episode getting to know Steelbeak and one other sort of new character. While trying to escape what they still think is a video game, Launchpad gets shot with the IntelliRay, and something incredible happens.
I'll take over from here, chap.
That's right, this episode gives us a look at what a smart Launchpad would be. And that's a fun idea for a story. But I have to admit, I kind of wish it didn't. I would have loved if this episode shot Launchpad with the IntelliRay and nothing changed. Not because Launchpad is dumb, though he does definitely follow that lovable fool role in the show and in writing. But sometimes the show's creators like to say Launchpad is just misunderstood. And I think it would have been really funny if he was shot with the ray and didn't actually get smarter. Of course, if we didn't use that trope that the IntelliRay didn't make him smarter, a lot of the fun stuff in this episode just couldn't have happened. As soon as he gets shot with the ray, Launchpad becomes like a real secret agent. He's suave, with his hair slicked back, and he has an accent for some reason. But it allows us to have these cool James Bond-esque action sequences that we probably couldn't have had before.
Can't go out there looking like this. All right, you dog. Where does Steelbeak keep his evening wear?
Although that's mostly used as a driver of the story to let Launchpad become a spy, that idea of being perceived as smart or dumb is kind of the whole driving point of this story. Steelbeak was only originally supposed to get the Duck family out of Funzo's, not get into a fight with them or capture them. But he was tired of people thinking of him as stupid, so he decided to steal the IntelliRay and use it to make the rest of the world less intelligent than he is. And although the episode does a good amount of work to show that Steelbeak isn't that smart of a guy, I think the suggestion that the ray made Launchpad smarter might not be right either. Although Launchpad is definitely a bit sharper in this episode and instantly figures out that there's a big foul plot going on and they're tracking Scrooge McDuck, overall I'm not sure the ray made him smarter, just more confident. Launchpad still says a few things in this episode that aren't actually that smart. This is really nitpicky, but at one point in the episode, he corrects Steelbeak's grammar with what he thinks is proper grammar. And that is the grammar most people would think is correct from how we've been taught, but it is not technically completely correct. It's less that he seems smarter, and more that he just seems like he's thinking clearly. It's like for the first time in his life, Launchpad is acting and thinking without distractions. He's not getting distracted by something in the world or going off in a tangent. It's like he had some sort of learning disability removed, and now he's just on track for the first time. And that's something that becomes more clear than ever when he learns that the only way to stop the IntelliRay from making all of Duckburg dumber is to get in the way of the ray himself and put him back to the way he used to be. Launchpad knows that it's the only solution, but he's thinking clearly now, and he knows that all he really wants is to be good enough to be Dewey's best friend. But that's the thing about friendship. If it's a great friendship, you don't need to prove yourself. And when Dewey lets him know that he's already good enough, that's all he needs to hear to know that he'll be okay as the original Launchpad again. Which brings us back to that song.
But now it's dawned on me that intellect I'll never see, so I must go.
Hi.
That song Dewey is singing in the beginning isn't just a spy movie song. It's Launchpad. It's how Launchpad feels. He's worried he won't be good enough for Dewey. And that's exactly what plays as he falls off of the IntelliRay satellite and into the bay.
For Dewey and Duckburg.
Dewey and Launchpad wake up back at Funzo's, still thinking that they played a game. Because while smart Launchpad figured it out, when he reverted back to regular Launchpad, he didn't remember the F.O.W.L plot at all. We end with Dewey and Launchpad proud to have beaten what they think is an AR game, and Scrooge mourning his riches in tickets. And the episode ends with Launchpad forgetting that there's a foul plot against the McDuck family. But we know. And yes, there was one more scene with the Rescue Rangers, coming in to provide a rescue at the end of the episode. As much fun as that Rescue Rangers bit is, though, it's so far removed from the importance of the plot that I just didn't feel the need to talk about it that much. But I do appreciate it being in there. And I'm pretty curious what this Rescue Rangers movie is going to be if it ever happens. The wrap-up plot at the end is pretty fun too, with one of the vultures saying that they don't want to destroy the world, they want to steal it. They are the fiendish organization for world larceny, after all. As much hype as this episode got for having that Rescue Rangers reference, however, that actually was probably my least favorite part of the episode. Don't get me wrong, I really did enjoy seeing those characters come back in some way. It was a fun nostalgic hit, and I really love the story of how they got in the episode. But I think my favorite parts about it are the friendship elements between Dewey and Launchpad and Scrooge and Webby trying to figure out the whole arcade thing and Scrooge's obsession. I also really think that using it to merge the idea of 00 Duck as the progenitor that created the show Darkwing Duck was a great excuse to bring in Steelbeak as the villain without Darkwing. And Steelbeak was incredibly funny and one of the best parts of this episode. But all that said, it probably isn't one of my favorite episodes of the season so far. It's okay, and it's not bad, but it just had a lot going on. And I think the AR element might be harder for some viewers to really wrap their head around if they're not familiar with the idea. But let me know if you think I'm wrong. Either way, I enjoyed this episode and really loved Ben Schwartz's song of Good Enough For You. And I hope this unscripted, unteleprompted version of this review was good enough for you. If it wasn't, let me know in the comments and maybe I'll do some more scripting. Otherwise, as always, thank you for watching. I hope you're all staying safe out there in this crazy world we live in. So try to keep calm, and as always, take it easy, Internet.